Rain hit the tin roof of the old supply shed like handfuls of thrown gravel, and Dana Whitfield cursed under her breath as she dragged the crate inside before the water could ruin it. She was not supposed to be out here. The construction crew had cleared this stretch of hillside 2 days ago to make room for a new water line, and the colony's safety officers had put up tape around the site, warning everyone to stay back until the ground stopped shifting. But Dana had seen something the crew missed, something buried in the churned mud near the tree line, and she could not just leave it there to rot in the storm. It was an egg, not a bird egg or anything she recognized from Earth. It was the size of a large melon, its shell a dull gray with faint silver lines running through it like cracks in old pottery. She had read enough of the colony's biology reports to know what it probably was. The dragonkin, the native species that lived in the hills beyond the human settlement, laid eggs like this in hidden nesting grounds. The construction crew must have dug too close to one without knowing it was there. Dana wrapped the egg in her jacket and carried it back to her quarters, telling herself she would report it to the wildlife office in the morning. She told herself the same thing the next morning and the morning after that. The truth was, she had grown attached to it faster than she wanted to admit. She kept it warm near the heating vent, checked on it before and after her shifts at the water plant, and found herself talking to it in the evenings, the way some people talk to plants. 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, the egg began to crack. Dana woke to a soft clicking sound and sat up fast, heart pounding. She watched as thin lines spread across the shell, slow at first, then faster, until a small piece broke away and a tiny clawed foot pushed through the gap. She did not call anyone. She did not have time to think about protocol or permits. She just sat on the floor beside the egg and watched. And when the hatchling finally broke free, exhausted and shivering, Dana wrapped it gently in a towel and held it against her chest. The hatchling was smaller than the wildlife reports said dragonkin younglings should be. Her scales were a pale silver, almost the color of moonlight, and her wings were folded tight and looked too delicate to ever hold real weight. She made a thin, rasping sound instead of the strong cry the reports described, and she struggled to lift her own head. Dana had read enough to know what this meant. In the wild, a hatchling this weak would likely be left behind by her own kind, unable to keep up, unable to survive. Dana decided right then that she was not going to let that happen. She named the hatchling Sable, after the dark tips on her small ears, the only part of her that was not silver. Over the following weeks, Dana fed her by hand, kept her warm, and built a soft nest of blankets in the corner of her quarters. She reported the hatching to the wildlife office, as she was required to do, but when the officer suggested Sable be handed over to a containment facility for observation, Dana refused. She argued that moving a hatchling this fragile could kill her, and after a tense back and forth, the officer agreed to let Dana keep Sable under supervision, at least for now. Colonel Reyes, who ran the colony's small defense force, heard about the situation from a friend in the wildlife office and came by one evening to see for himself. He was a broad, quiet man who did not trust easily, and he made it clear he did not like the idea of a wild animal living inside the human settlement, especially one belonging to a species the colony barely understood. But when he saw Sable curled in Dana's lap, her thin chest rising and falling as she slept, something in his expression softened just slightly. "She's not going to grow big enough to hurt anyone," Dana said, guessing at his worry. "That's not what worries me," Reyes admitted. "It's the ones who might come looking for her." Dana did not fully understand what he meant that night. She thought he meant the dragonkin, who might one day notice a lost egg and come searching for it. She did not yet know how right and how wrong that thought would turn out to be. The real change came 3 weeks later, during the worst storm the colony had seen that season. The wind screamed against the walls, and the power flickered twice before steadying. Dana held Sable close, trying to calm her, since the hatchling seemed unusually agitated, thrashing in her arms and letting out sharp, panicked cries. Dana had never seen her act like this. Then Sable went still. Her small body stiffened, her eyes turned a strange, clouded white, and she raised one clawed foot, pointing it toward the window facing the old transformer station down the hill. She let out one final shriek, sharp and urgent, and then went limp, exhausted, as if the effort had drained something out of her. Dana barely had time to wonder what had just happened before a deep boom rattled the windows. Outside, an explosion of white light flared where the transformer station stood, followed by the low groan of failing machinery. Emergency lights kicked on across the colony a moment later. Dana looked down at the small silver hatchling in her arms, now breathing slow and even, seemingly unaware of what she had just done. A cold, strange feeling settled over Dana, somewhere between fear and wonder. She did not know it yet, but everything about her quiet, ordinary life was about to change. The transformer explosion became the talk of the colony for exactly 2 days before people moved on to other worries, as people do. Dana did not move on. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the way Sable's eyes had turned cloudy white, the way her small claw had pointed at the exact building that exploded minutes later. She told herself it might have been a coincidence. Hatchlings twitched and cried for all sorts of reasons. But a quiet, persistent part of her did not believe that, and she decided to test it, carefully and privately, without telling anyone what she suspected. Over the next month, Dana began paying close attention every time she held Sable for long periods. Most of the time, nothing happened. Sable ate, slept, chewed on the corner of a blanket, and acted like any small animal might. But every so often, usually when Dana was tired and not paying full attention, Sable would go rigid in her arms, her eyes clouding over, and let out a short, sharp sound before returning to normal. Dana started keeping a small notebook by her bed, writing down the date, the time, and anything unusual that happened afterward. The pattern was there, faint but real. A cracked water pipe in the greenhouse, 2 days after Sable had clawed at nothing in that direction. A minor fire in the recycling unit, the night after Sable let out a single sharp cry while staring at the far wall. None of it was dramatic enough to prove anything to a skeptic, but taken together, it was enough to convince Dana that something was happening that she did not understand. The event that changed everything happened on a supply run. A shuttle was scheduled to bring in medical supplies from the orbital station, landing at the colony's small pad just after dawn. Dana had Sable with her that morning, wrapped in a sling against her chest, since the hatchling had grown restless being left alone in the quarters. As they walked near the landing pad on their way to the market stalls, Sable suddenly went stiff, her claws digging into Dana's arm hard enough to leave marks. Her eyes turned white, and she let out a long, distressed wail, unlike anything Dana had heard from her before, twisting her body toward the landing pad itself. Dana did not think. She ran toward the pad control building, shouting for anyone who would listen. A young technician came out, annoyed at first, until he saw the panic on Dana's face and the strange, still hatchling in her arms, eyes clouded white. Something about the sight made him pause instead of dismissing her outright. He pulled up the shuttle's landing data on his console, more to humor her than anything else, and his face went pale. The shuttle's descent path showed a small but real error, a miscalculation in the landing angle that would have sent it clipping the edge of the pad instead of landing safely in the center. It was the kind of mistake that might have been caught in time anyway, or might not have been noticed until it was too late. The technician radioed the shuttle immediately, and the pilot corrected course with several minutes to spare. Word of the near miss spread fast, and this time people were not so quick to move on. The technician, unable to stay quiet about what he had seen, told his supervisor, who told Colonel Reyes. Reyes came to see Dana that same evening, his expression unreadable. "Tell me what happened," he said, not as a request. Dana told him everything, the transformer explosion, the notebook full of small predictions, the wail before the shuttle's landing error was discovered. Reyes listened without interrupting, his eyes moving occasionally to Sable, who was curled asleep in her nest, looking small and harmless. "You understand what this means, if it's true," Reyes said finally. "I don't know what it means," Dana admitted. "I just know she's scared and tired afterward every time, and I don't want people treating her like some kind of machine." Reyes did not answer that directly. Instead, he asked to see the notebook, and Dana, after a long hesitation, let him look. He read through the pages twice, then closed the notebook and handed it back. "Keep this quiet as long as you can," he said, "but it won't stay quiet, not after today." He was right. Within a week, rumors were moving through the colony faster than Dana could deny them. Some people laughed it off as superstition. Others began showing up near Dana's quarters, hopping to catch a glimpse of the hatchling everyone was suddenly whispering about. The rumors did not stay inside the human settlement for long. 10 days after the shuttle incident, a small group arrived at the edge of the colony, moving with the quiet, careful grace that marked them as dragonkin. At the front walked an older one, her scales a deep, weathered bronze, her expression sharp and unreadable. This was Elder Thrain, a name Dana had heard mentioned with respect and caution by the wildlife officers. Thrain did not ask for permission to enter the colony. She simply walked to Dana's door, flanked by 2 younger dragonkin, and waited until Dana opened it herself. "We have heard," Thrain said, her voice low and rough, "that a hatchling of ours lives among you, one who sees what has not yet happened." Dana's grip tightened instinctively around the sling holding Sable. "She's not dangerous," Dana said. "She's just a baby." Thrain's gaze moved past Dana to the small, silver shape curled against her chest, and something flickered in the elder's eyes that Dana could not quite read. "That," Thrain said quietly, "is exactly what worries me." Elder Thrain did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. Her quiet, measured words carried more weight than shouting ever could, and Dana felt the full force of them as she stood in her doorway with Sable pressed against her chest. Thrain explained, in careful terms, that dragonkin younglings sometimes showed small talents as they grew, a sharper sense of smell, a better memory, a knack for sensing weather changes before they arrived. But nothing like what Dana described, nothing that touched the future itself. "If this is real," Thrain said, "she does not belong only to you, she belongs to her own kind as well. We must examine her, understand what she carries, and decide together what is best for her future." Dana wanted to refuse outright, but she forced herself to think instead of react. She asked what examine meant exactly, and Thrain admitted it would involve taking Sable to the dragonkin's nesting grounds for a period of time, away from human contact, so the elders could observe her without what Thrain called outside influence. Dana's stomach turned at the thought. She had seen how distressed Sable became during her episodes, how exhausted she was afterward. She could not imagine putting her through that surrounded by strangers, no matter how well-meaning. "Give me time," Dana said instead. "Let me think about this. Let me talk to the people here who need to know." Thrain agreed, though her expression made it clear she would not wait long. She and her companions left as quietly as they had arrived, disappearing back into the hills, but Dana knew this was only the beginning of a much larger problem. She was right. Within days, Administrator Voss, the colony's senior civilian official, requested a formal meeting. Dana had met Voss only a handful of times before, mostly at community announcements, and had never had reason to think much of him one way or another. That changed quickly once they sat across from each other in his office, Sable dozing in the sling against Dana's chest. Voss was polite, even friendly, but there was a calculating edge beneath his words that Dana did not like. He spoke of the colony's difficult position, cut off from easy resupply, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain and unknown dangers, and how a creature capable of sensing danger before it struck could change everything for their safety. He used words like asset and program and controlled testing, and every time he did, Dana felt her patience shrinking. "She is not a warning system," Dana said finally, cutting him off. "She's a living creature, a child in her own way." Voss did not argue directly. Instead, he suggested a compromise, a small, supervised study conducted here in the colony rather than the dragonkin's nesting grounds, with proper safety measures and medical oversight. He framed it as a way to protect Sable from being taken away entirely, either by the dragonkin or by outside interests who might hear about her and come looking. Dana did not fully trust his motives, but the argument had just enough truth in it to make her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she agreed to a single test under her own conditions. Voss agreed, a little too easily, which should have warned her. The test took place 3 days later in a small medical room, with a nervous young doctor overseeing vital signs and a data recorder capturing everything. The plan was simple enough on paper. Dana would hold Sable as she normally did, and they would wait to see if anything happened, comparing it to a second attempt where a soldier, chosen at random from Raze's unit, would hold Sable instead. Voss wanted to know if the connection was truly tied to Dana specifically or to humans in general. The first part of the test went as expected. Dana held Sable, spoke softly to her, and after nearly 20 minutes, the hatchling's eyes clouded briefly, and she let out a short warning cry directed at nothing in particular in the room. The doctor noted it down, unsure what to make of it, since nothing dangerous followed. Dana suspected the vision might have been about something far away or far in the future, beyond what they could observe. The second part of the test went badly. The soldier, a young man named Corvin who looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation, took Sable carefully into his arms under Dana's watchful eye. At first, nothing happened. Sable simply looked confused, twisting to look back at Dana as if asking permission or reassurance. Then, without warning, she began to shriek, a raw, pained sound Dana had never heard from her before, thrashing violently in Corvin's arms. Corvin, startled and unsure what to do, nearly dropped her before Dana rushed forward and took her back. The moment Sable was back in Dana's arms, the shrieking stopped, replaced by ragged, exhausted breathing. Her eyes did not cloud white this time. There was no vision, no warning, just pain and fear. The doctor, shaken, noted that whatever connection allowed Sable to sense the future clearly was not simply a matter of being held by any human. Something more specific was involved, something tied to Dana herself, or perhaps to trust and familiarity built over time. Voss did not look pleased by this outcome, though he tried to hide it. A talent tied to one specific caretaker was far less useful to him than one that could be transferred to whichever soldier or officer he chose. Still, he thanked Dana for her cooperation and said the colony would revisit the matter once they had reviewed the results. Dana left the medical room shaken, holding a trembling, exhausted Sable close, and for the first time she felt real fear, not for herself, but for what people might try next now that they understood the truth. Sable was not a tool that could be handed to anyone. She was bonded to Dana in a way no one fully understood, and that made her both more precious and more dangerous than before to everyone who wanted a piece of her. News, as Colonel Reyes had warned, did not stay contained within the colony's fences for long. A trading vessel passing through the system picked up fragments of the story from a careless conversation at the market stalls, and within weeks, whispers of a creature that could see the future had spread far beyond anything Dana or the colony administration could control. Most of what traveled outward was exaggerated or wrong, but it was enough to draw the wrong kind of attention. That attention arrived roughly a month later in the form of a sleek diplomatic shuttle requesting landing clearance under the banner of trade negotiations. Administrator Voss, eager for any opportunity to strengthen the colony's supply lines, approved the visit without much hesitation. The visitor introduced herself as Carnessa, a envoy representing a rival power with territory several systems away, known mostly to the colonists through second-hand reports of tense border disputes elsewhere in the region. Carnessa was polished and precise in every movement, her manner warm on the surface but sharp underneath, like a blade wrapped in silk. She spent her first 2 days in formal meetings with Voss and the Colony Council, discussing trade routes, resource sharing, and technology exchange, nothing that raised alarm. It was only during a public festival held to mark the change of season that her true purpose became clear. The festival filled the colony's main square with music, food stalls, and lanterns strung between buildings, a rare night of relaxation for people who spent most of their days working hard against a harsh, unfamiliar world. Dana had brought Sable along, now old enough to walk short distances on her own, though Dana still kept her close, watching the crowds carefully out of habit. It happened fast. One moment, Dana was watching Sable investigate a fallen piece of festival bread with great curiosity. The next, Sable froze completely, her small body going rigid, eyes clouding white in an instant. She let out a sharp, urgent cry and lunged toward Dana, climbing up into her arms with surprising speed for a creature her size, claws digging in tight. Dana barely had time to react before 2 figures in dark, nondescript clothing pushed through the crowd toward them, moving with clear purpose rather than festival cheer. Dana's instincts, sharpened by weeks of tension, kicked in immediately. She turned and ran, shouting for help, clutching Sable tightly against her chest as the crowd around her scattered in confusion. One of the figures managed to grab her arm, wrenching her backward hard enough to nearly pull Sable from her grip. Dana twisted away, screaming now, and the sound drew the attention of nearby colonists, and more importantly, a pair of Raze's soldiers who had been patrolling the festival's edges. What followed was chaotic and brief, a scuffle that ended with one of the attackers subdued and the other fleeing into the darkness beyond the lantern light, disappearing before anyone could catch him. Raze arrived minutes later, furious and grim, taking charge of the scene with practiced efficiency. The captured attacker, questioned that same night, revealed little at first, but his equipment told its own story. Hidden among his gear was a small stasis container, clearly designed to hold and transport a living creature safely, along with communication devices tuned to a frequency that traced back, eventually, to Carnessa's shuttle. Confronted the next morning with the evidence, Carnessa did not bother denying it for long. Her calm, diplomatic mask slipped just enough to reveal something colder underneath. She explained, almost casually, that her government had heard rumors of a creature capable of predicting danger and disaster, and had decided such an asset was too valuable to leave in the hands of an isolated, poorly defended human colony. She had hoped to acquire Sable quietly, through trade or persuasion, and had only resorted to more direct methods when it became clear the humans would not simply hand her over. "You misunderstand," Carnessa said, addressing the furious council gathered to confront her. "I am not your enemy. I am simply someone who recognizes value where others fail to protect it properly." Raze, standing near the back of the room with his arms crossed, spoke before Voss could respond. "You tried to kidnap a child in the middle of a festival. That makes you our enemy, whatever fine words you want to wrap it in." Carnessa was expelled from the colony within hours, her shuttle escorted out of the system's local space by two of the colony's small defense craft, though everyone understood this was unlikely to be the end of it. A power willing to attempt an abduction in public was not likely to simply give up after one failure. The attempted kidnapping did something unexpected within the colony itself, where suspicion and disagreement had divided humans, dragonkin, and even different factions within the human administration. The shared threat from outside began to draw them together, at least temporarily. Elder Thrain returned to the colony 2 days later, this time without the cold formality of her first visit. "We were wrong to think only of taking her from you," Thrain admitted, standing once again in Dana's doorway, though her tone now carried something closer to respect than demand. "The danger she faces does not come only from within your kind or mine. It comes from outside both." Dana, still shaken from the festival attack, found herself nodding slowly in agreement. Sable, sensing the shift in tension, peered out from behind Dana's leg at the elder dragonkin, no longer hiding entirely, though still cautious. "Then maybe," Dana said carefully, "it's time we started working together instead of arguing over who she belongs to." Thrain studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod, the closest thing to agreement Dana had yet seen from her. Neither of them knew yet just how soon that fragile alliance would be tested. The weeks following the festival attack settled into an uneasy sort of routine, though nothing about the colony felt truly calm anymore. Raze doubled the patrols along the perimeter. Voss quietly reached out to allied trading partners in case reinforcements were needed, and Elder Thrain began visiting more frequently, bringing small groups of dragonkin to help watch over the colony's edges alongside the human soldiers. It was an uneasy partnership, built more out of shared fear than genuine trust, but it held. Sable, meanwhile, was growing. Her wings had filled out enough that she could manage short, clumsy flights across a room, and her silver scales had darkened slightly at the edges, a sign, Thrain explained, of healthy growth for her kind. But along with her physical growth came a troubling change in her visions. What had once been brief, scattered warnings now came more often and hit her harder, leaving her shaking and drained for hours afterward instead of minutes. Dana kept careful notes, as she always had, and shared them openly now with both Raze and Thrain instead of hiding them the way she once had. A pattern was forming that none of them liked. Sable's visions were no longer just small warnings about explosions or landing errors. They were becoming larger, more connected, fragments of something bigger that none of them could yet fully piece together. The breaking point came during a joint council meeting held in the colony's largest gathering hall to discuss long-term defenses against another possible attack from Karness's faction. Dana attended with Sable in her arms, as had become normal practice, since keeping her close seemed to ease the intensity of her episodes slightly, even if it could not stop them entirely. Partway through Voss's explanation of proposed defense upgrades, Sable went rigid without warning, far more violently than usual. Her claws dug hard into Dana's arms, drawing blood this time, and her cry was not the short, sharp sound everyone had grown used to. It was long, ragged, and full of pain, echoing through the hall and silencing every conversation instantly. Dana held her tightly, murmuring soft reassurances, though she herself was frightened by the intensity of what was happening. Sable's small body convulsed once, twice, and then went completely still, her eyes clouded pure white for far longer than any previous vision, nearly a full minute passing in tense silence before she finally slumped, exhausted, against Dana's chest. When Sable was calm enough, Dana gently asked her, as she sometimes did after milder episodes, whether she could show what she had seen. It was not something Sable could describe in words, not yet, but Dana had learned that pressing her small claw gently against a flat surface sometimes let her scratch out simple shapes, fragments of what she had glimpsed. With trembling effort, Sable scratched jagged, uneven lines into the soft wood of the council table. It took the room a moment to understand what they were looking at, but once Thrain leaned forward and studied the marks closely, her expression turned grim. "Fire," Thrain said quietly, "here and there." She pointed first to a rough shape that resembled the colony's central buildings, then to another cluster of marks representing, unmistakably, the dragonkin's sacred nesting grounds in the hills. Both were surrounded by jagged lines that could only mean flame and destruction. Reyes leaned in as well, studying the crude drawing with a soldier's practical eye. "This isn't a small raid," he said. "This looks coordinated." Both sites hit close together. The implication hung heavy over the room. Karness's faction, humiliated by their failed attempt to take Sable quietly, was likely preparing something far larger and more destructive. An assault meant not just to capture her, but to punish both the humans and the dragonkin for standing against them, striking at both communities at once. The council meeting that followed the vision stretched late into the night, filled with tense argument. Voss, shaken but still calculating, suggested the fastest solution might be to use Sable more directly and deliberately, holding her for extended periods, pushing her to focus on specific questions about troop movements and attack timing in order to gain every possible advantage before the assault came. He framed it, not unreasonably, as the only way to save both settlements from the very disaster she had just shown them. Dana felt sick at the suggestion, even knowing the danger it was meant to prevent. She remembered how weak and shaken Sable had looked after the single, unplanned vision they had just witnessed. Deliberately pushing her toward more, again and again, risked breaking something in her that might never heal, even if it helped win the coming fight. "There has to be another way," Dana said, her voice tight with both exhaustion and fear. "We use what she's already shown us. We don't turn her into a machine we crank for answers whenever we're desperate." Thrain, surprisingly, spoke in support of Dana's position, her earlier hesitation about the bond between Dana and Sable now replaced by something closer to protective conviction. "A hatchling pushed past her limits does not become a stronger weapon," Thrain said firmly. "She becomes a broken one if she survives at all." Voss, faced with resistance from both Reyes and Thrain as well as Dana, reluctantly backed down from his suggestion, though the tension in the room made clear the argument was far from settled. They would need to prepare for the attack Sable had shown them using only the fragments already given, without risking her further, and hope it would be enough. As the meeting finally broke apart, exhausted people filing out into the dark, Dana carried a still-trembling Sable back toward their quarters, her mind racing through everything that needed to be done in the days ahead. She did not know exactly when the attack would come, only that it was coming, and that everyone she had come to care about, human and dragonkin alike, stood in its path. For the first time since finding the abandoned egg in the mud, Dana allowed herself to truly fear what the future might hold, the very thing Sable alone could glimpse and could not yet fully explain. In the days that followed the council meeting, the colony transformed itself as quickly as its limited resources allowed. Rays worked with a small team of engineers to reinforce weak points along the perimeter, focusing especially on the areas Sable's crude drawing had marked with jagged lines. Thrain, in turn, rallied the dragonkin to strengthen defenses around their nesting grounds, and for the first time in living memory, human soldiers and dragonkin warriors trained together, learning each other's methods and building rough but genuine coordination between two very different fighting styles. Dana spent those days differently. Rather than pushing Sable for more visions, as Voss had wanted, she focused on keeping her calm and rested, holding her often but without forcing anything, letting whatever came come naturally. It was Rays, surprisingly, who suggested the approach that finally gave them useful information without further harming Sable. Instead of demanding specific answers, they simply kept her nearby during planning sessions, letting her presence alone do whatever it naturally did, watching closely for any small reaction, a flinch, a shift in her breathing, a brief clouding of her eyes that might hint at which plans felt right and which did not. It was imperfect, slow, and frustrating at times, but it worked better than anyone expected. During one late-night session, as Rays traced a proposed defensive line across a rough map of the colony's northern edge, Sable let out a small, distressed whimper and turned away from that section entirely, burying her face against Dana's shoulder. Rays redrew the line further back the next morning, unwilling to ignore even a small warning after everything they had already witnessed. The attack came 11 days after the vision, in the deep hours before dawn, exactly as Sable had begun to grow restless the evening before, refusing to settle no matter how Dana tried to soothe her. Rays had kept extra patrols on alert every night since the council meeting, and it was that vigilance, combined with Sable's restlessness, that gave them the crucial extra minutes needed to sound the alarm before the first strike landed. Karnessa's forces came in fast, small armored craft descending toward both the colony and the nesting grounds simultaneously, exactly as the vision had shown. But this time, neither target was unprepared. Reinforced defenses along the colony's northern edge, the very section Sable had reacted against days earlier, held under the first wave of fire, buying precious time for the defenders to organize a proper response. At the nesting grounds, dragonkin warriors, trained now alongside human soldiers, met the attacking force with a coordination that clearly caught Karnessa's fighters off guard. Dana remained near the colony's command post throughout the battle, Sable held tightly against her chest despite Rays' earlier suggestion that she retreat to somewhere safer. Dana had refused, arguing that Sable's continued reactions, even small ones, might still provide crucial warning if something unexpected happened. She turned out to be right. Partway through the fighting, Sable suddenly stiffened and let out a sharp cry, twisting to look toward a supply depot on the colony's eastern side, an area not originally under threat. Dana relayed the warning immediately, and a scout sent to check the area discovered a second, smaller group of attackers attempting to slip in from an unguarded angle, quickly intercepted before they could do any damage. The battle lasted just under 2 hours, brutal and chaotic, but ultimately decisive. Karnessa's forces, faced with far stronger resistance than anticipated at both targets, and having lost the element of surprise entirely, began a hurried retreat before the sun had fully risen. Rays' soldiers pursued them only far enough to ensure they were truly leaving, unwilling to risk further casualties chasing an enemy already in full withdrawal. In the aftermath, the colony and the dragonkin nesting grounds both bore scars, scorched earth, damaged structures, a handful of injuries among the defenders, but nothing close to the devastation Sable's vision had shown them. The disaster she had glimpsed, fire consuming both communities, had been avoided, not through pushing her past her limits, but through trusting the warnings she gave freely and preparing carefully around them. Elder Thrain arrived at the colony 2 days later, once the worst of the cleanup and repairs were underway, and this time she did not come with demands or careful diplomatic distance. She came directly to Dana's quarters, where Sable lay curled contentedly in her nest, worn out but healthy, and knelt beside her with something close to reverence. "You saved more than your own kind," Thrain said quietly, addressing Sable directly, though the hatchling only blinked sleepily up at her. "You saved mine as well, little one, and you did it without being broken for the effort." Turning to Dana, Thrain's expression softened further. "The bond between you and her is not something we understand fully, even now, but we no longer question whether it should exist. Whatever protection she needs, whatever rights she deserves among her own kind, you will have our support in seeing she receives them." Administrator Voss, for his part, found himself with far less leverage than before. The Colony Council, shaken by how close they had come to disaster, and mindful of how effective the gentler, trust-based approach had proven compared to his original suggestion, moved quickly to formalize protections for Sable, recognizing her, in the colony's official records, not as an asset or program subject, but as a resident under Dana's guardianship, with rights against forced testing or separation from her chosen caretaker. Months passed after that, slower and calmer than the tense weeks before the battle. Sable continued to grow, her wings strengthening enough for real flight, her visions remaining unpredictable but no longer treated as something to fear or exploit. She still came to Dana during storms, still curled against her during moments of quiet uncertainty, and still, every so often, went still and distant for a few strange seconds. Eyes clouding white with glimpses of things yet to come. One evening, sitting together on the small porch outside Dana's quarters, as the sun set golden over the hills, Sable stirred against her, eyes briefly clouding in that familiar way. Dana waited, as she always did now, patient and unafraid. When Sable's eyes cleared again, she simply nuzzled closer, calm and unbothered, offering no warning cry, no urgent claw pointing toward danger. Whatever she had seen, this time it seemed, was something worth being at peace with. Dana smiled, wrapping her arms a little tighter around the small silver dragon who had once been left behind as too weak to survive, and who had, in her own quiet way, ended up protecting them all.